the spleen. In looking at the spleen and in looking at these two streams of the spleen, notice something. The tribal aspect of that. The tribal aspect of that is a projected aspect unless the ego can get to the throat. In other words, the two channels that make up the lower part of that stream, they end up in the ego at the 26th gate. That's very different than looking at the collective logic in which that stream is a manifesting stream. So important to be clear about the responsibility of logic to inform. I mean, it is a responsibility of logic to inform before it experiments. One of the things that frightens humanity the most is the mad scientist. You know, the person that right now is trying to clone a human being and hasn't told anybody. When logic does that, we get very upset. It has a manifesting potential. Now, we know that it's difficult for logic to get energy, but nonetheless, in this context, when you look at this stream is a manifesting stream. And it means ultimately that you cannot get people to identify with you unless you inform them first. Otherwise, they're going to resist you. So many people who are looking for grants, who are looking for government money, who are looking for financial support for their experiment, that they don't realize the simple mechanic of that. Because it's a simple mechanic. Getting others to identify with you. You know, this is the whole thing. It's the whole point. And that you're only going to get them to identify if you have the right strategy. First, what you have to do is inform them that you would like to try to, get them to see and identify with your experiment. But you can't just rush up to them and assume that they're going to fall in when you blurt all that in their face. You know, it's like these people in bar arguments who are always screaming about the government doesn't work. I mean, all of that's really nice and good, but it doesn't mean anything. The only time it means anything is when you have something that can replace it. When you have something that somebody else can identify with and see logically that it has a way of being able to solve that problem, move on in the pattern. But it's very different at the tribal level. And it tells you something so important about the tribe and its hot and cold, is that the basic design of the tribe, without its leaders, without the 45-21, remember, that's part of it. But just looking at the symmetry of dealing with two channels as streams, the thing to see that for the tribe, they have to be recognized. In other words, they have to see that there is a security cause. They're not there to be paranoid about the security cause. You know, they're there not to enter into battle lightly. They're there to be invited in that sense. They have to wait for those things to come to them. But the moment you bring the leaders, it changes. But the tribe was always in this dilemma about what to do about sexuality. In other words, how to handle the desire field. What they discovered was that food will do that. If you control the food, you can control the sexuality in the tribe. So you condition them. What you get is that you get a high level of sexual exhaustion because of what the tribe conditions. You see, if we were just living out our fifth tone nature, we would actually have less sex than what we do today. In other words, yes, it would always be with someone different, but it doesn't mean you're always going to get them. I mean, after all, that's the pure chase. And it doesn't mean you're always going to succeed. And the one you may be chasing, somebody else may get there before you. Now, the tribe doesn't like any of that. Let's organize all of this. And one of the things that's so essential for humanity is that at the most mundane, at the crudest level, the only way we begin to find our oneness, our wholeness, is in our capacity to be able to communicate to each other. In other words, the gift of being able to mutate sound, mutate the waves in order to be able to initiate language in that sense, in order to be able to initiate our capacity to communicate with each other. And of course, in this day and age, when we have these incredible mediums for communication, that frequency is beginning to do its job. In other words, we're beginning to layer all of consciousness with the same spontaneous, continuing input. It means that every single one of us, the only way in which we connect to the whole is through what we take in acoustically. And our contribution to the whole operates through an entirely different sense. You know, this is one of the things about what it is to be human and it is to be awake. The vast majority of humanity is deaf, and they do not hear what's going on. They don't hear at all. It's like seeing. You know, if you're trying to get someplace and that's the only place that you can look, you see nothing else. You know, when you're trying to hear something, you hear nothing. You miss all the other things that are there to be heard. And of course, one of the things about being awake and being surrendered, which by the way is just mechanical, it's just following your strategy, is that you hear differently. You're not attached to hearing what you think you need to hear or want to hear, and you're not pointing towards a source that you think you're going to get it from. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. And it is our way of being together. Being open acoustically is part of what people call love. You know, it's one of the deepest needs in romance is to have somebody who will listen to you. Otherwise, there's no way in which you can make that bond. And more relationships are destroyed because somebody's got a deaf ear. They're trying to hear something else, and they're not open to hearing what's really there. That's going to stay there for 2 days, so I guess you can write it down. I didn't make any copies of it. It's probably for me. What are we going to do with that one?
It's acoustic.
It is acoustic. I mean, it could be somebody desperately trying to find out where Lizard Head Hall is. You never know. Yeah, if you just turn down the tone, where's that? Okay. Before we get into the detail of any of this, I want you to look at the division and the way that it's structured. In other words, that you can see that the 6 tones are broken up into 3 specific groups. And that we have moved away from the base, and the moment that you move away from the base, you're moving into the physical design. Remember that the base itself is an orientation. This is all about cognition. And one of the things to see very clearly is that the moment that you move to this level, you start working with the basic structure of the form itself. In other words, you're working at basic levels of chemistry, and they operate through what we know in design as 3 primary centers that are involved in the awareness process. In other words, the spleen, the ajna, and the solar plex. Now think about what happens when you have one mate. If you have one mate, you've got sexual access all the time. You have sexual access all the time. So this is the promise of the tribe to the desire field. It says, look, you can have much more sex being married than you'll ever have running around being single. And you know, we fell for it. Another bad idea that humanity sucked up deep into their system. But it's just, it's the way that it works. We take all that stuff serious, eh? Helpless in that. Now, there's another way that the tribe does that. And the other way that the tribe does that, it's not enough. After all, desire blinds, eh? It's not enough to have rules and to have bonding, pair bonding. It's not enough. We all know it's not enough. So they added something else. What they added was the almighty fear of the Godhead. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's ass. It says that in the Bible. Well, it's true. Or thy neighbor's handservant or maidservant or whatever the case may be. Because if you do, if you get excited and turned on and God is going to get you. Oh, that's cruel, eh? I mean, the tribe is really cruel. Our God will destroy you if you do that. Look at all these women walking around in veils. That it's a sin to drop that veil. I mean, this is the sixth tone at its almighty best. We thought we made that all up. You read sociological, historical perspectives, you read these people that are trying to figure out how humanity evolved. And there's all these people who think we made all that up. That we made up the pair bonding, blah, 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 whatever the case may be, that we created all of these things. It was already there in the program. It was already there in the program. There was nothing we had to do. We didn't have to invent the tribe. We didn't have to invent a using God. There's people who think we invented that. We didn't invent that. We were designed to believe in it. I mean, we were designed right from the beginning at the moment that we were going to get this ability to have this reflective consciousness that one of the main forces in our life is that because we can kill, we're terrified something's going to come out of the sky and knock the hell out of us. You see, the moment you become a killer, you realize right away that you can be killed. And at the moment that you become a fighter, you realize right away that one day somebody is going to be better. It's always like that. It's built into us. And built into us is this enormous fear of the unknown, unnameable creature that can punish us. Yahweh. Yahweh is great for that. Eh? The God of the ancient Jewish tribes. Nasty son of a bitch, eh? I mean, nasty, 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 nasty. I will punish you to your 10th generation. I mean, give me a break. But you see, this was built into us. But the longer that pattern stayed stable, and the more in which that pattern became organized, so it became really efficient and useful and whatever and ever, eventually all of those tribal beings got their own phone. But the pattern has to be durable. It has to stay long enough. Remember, continuity means everything to the tribe. The tribe is never going to accept a collective fashion. It doesn't want a flavor that's going to disappear. But what the tribe will look to in the collective is when the collective can establish something that's reliable and works. I mean, after all, the tribe allows its children to go into collective schools. And in a collective society like America, you can see that you're always going to have the backlash. You got all these people now that are funding private schools. You got all these people that want their little tribal secular school or non-secular school. You got the Catholic school and this and that and all these things. This is the whole struggle for the planet. The struggle for the planet is the children. You know my pitch. Human design is tough for adults. Let's teach it to the kids, please. Learn from the collective. Teach the children. You teach the children, you change a generation, you change the way everything operates. That's why we have all these funny fatherlands and motherlands. You know, we have the collective always trying to assert its parenthood over all of us. That the collective and the logic will soothe us and warm us and protect us. And as long as we all agree with the prevailing morality, then everything is going to operate smoothly. The one thing left about the second tone is that out of its uncertainty, there is a restlessness in its spirit that you will always meet. And it doesn't matter whether or not in their process that they have a solid pattern that they can identify with, they will remain uncertain in that pattern. And it's something that you see as a cliche in the artist. The performing artist is an example. Logical art is about repetition in order to reach mastery. And yet, if you're caught up in repetition to reach mastery, it means that there is never satisfaction. Never. There is accomplishment, but not satisfaction. So the great musician that plays a concert, that musician will never, ever, ever walk off that stage saying, that was it. I mean, it's not possible. And so there's a restlessness in the spirit. There is this restlessness that is seeking a final perfection. Now here's where the joke comes in. If you take morality to its final perfection, you get Judgment Day. You get the good go to heaven and the bad go to hell. And it's over. You know, the good don't have to deal with the bad anymore. The bad don't have to deal with the good anymore. It's over. You know, you get to Judgment Day. But there's a joke in that. You get to death in that. And it takes care of basic business. Its deepest concern is our survival. So when you're dealing with the splenic binary, that these are the oldest and most developed departments that we have. You can see that if you look at the first and second tones, you see that the quality of them, the sense of them, is smell and taste. Now, of course, knowing design, you can see that this is related to the streams operating through the splenic center, but without the individual. Remember that the acoustic runs through everything. The acoustic is the general medium through which all of this operates. So here in looking at the splenic binary, what you're looking at is smell. This is the 54, 32, 44, 26. And it goes all the way up to the 21 and finally at the 45. Now the whole thing about 45s is that they're always trying to avoid the smell. But that's another story. So the first thing to see is that when you're looking at the binary, you can also see that that binary is going to operate. Now think about what I'm actually telling you. What I'm actually telling you is that, for example, let's say that you have the first tone. The first tone is part of your design. One of the things to recognize about that is that that tone's going to operate more efficiently if it happens to be in that stream, if it happens to be in one of those gates. But if you don't have that, what that's going to mean is that acoustically, you're going to be attracted to those people who will have activation in those gates that you can take into your system. Always remember, we're not alone. It's very complex when you get to this level because there's many, many things going on at the same time. And it's through the acoustics that we find our necessary companions. After all, some of us have to put out a specific tone in a specific place. Others have to take in the tone. It's always like that. We have all these locks and keys that are operating. Remember, there is a deep connection here from tone to color, which means that the structure that's laid here at the tone level goes into what later you see as your design. In other words, you're going to be able to read back to this place. It doesn't mean you get the contact with it within your being. Remember that most of us are always going to be limited to motive. When you see your motivations, you will immediately recognize them. In other words, color is something that once it's there for you to see, you will recognize it. But not necessarily tone, in the sense that you can really feel that or the essence of that within you, because by the time you get to color, it's personalized. See, that's the difference between tone and color. You know, tone is there to integrate into the whole, but to set a platform for the personal experience. So there's a bridging that's taking place here between tone and color, and that bridging can be seen in the design where it's impacting in the physical design itself. One of the things you'll notice, because I will take you through that, is that each and every one of the gates are different as subtleties. In other words, these are vast departments that are broken up into little sub-departments. Okay, so you've got all the 54 beings as an example. What is essential to any sixth tone is that their territory is secure. That's primary. And now you see how different that is from the fifth tone that wanders. You know, that fifth tone is just going to be going and going and going and going, following its desire. But that's not what the sixth tone wants. What the sixth tone wants is a safe, secure territory. A territory that they can claim as their own. Now, by the way, that's not personal. That's not about saying this is my piece of land. This is about saying this is our piece of land. You know, and usually in the beginning, this was their God's piece of land. You know, that their God let them use, or whatever the case may be, or goddess, whatever. The technical description of how that works. Basically what it is to find out initially if there are any centers that have no significance. Then of course the whole matrix breaks down. Then to be able to see the graduated differences between significance. In other words, which centers are more significant than others. So we discovered that all of them are significant. That is, as we did with type, the nine-centered matrix stands up. But what was so fascinating was that on a scale of significance, the least significant center was the ajna. By the way, the real joke is that when we did the same analysis on the dream rave, that in the dream rave, where you may know that in our dreaming state, that's when we're totally involved in the non-personal. And in the dream rave, of course, the center that's the least significant is the G. So in dealing with the ajna center, you know, it's one of these things, it's the great joke of what it is to be a human being. Here we are, you know, and here we have this wonderful mechanism, this mind of ours, but it is the least significant. It does not have inner authority. It is not going to be able to tell us what is correct for us to do, not do, all of those things. However, it is about us having the ability to store and communicate with each other the experience of existence. I mean, that is what it's about. You know, mind is there so that we can communicate, that we can interact, and that we can hold ourselves together as a whole. Because that's our main mechanism for holding ourselves together, is that through mind and through the collective mind, we are able to establish what is and what isn't the world. And you'll notice that when you get into the mind, you have nothing but the collective. You know, that's one of the things that separates the tribe from the collective so profoundly. I mean, the tribe is not into the mental trip. It's not what they're about. And of course, the collective is entirely into the mental trip. That's what they are about, you know. Now, I have an old farmer friend of mine, shepherd in Ibiza. And whenever the moon was full, he would pump water. And I thought, geez, Antonio, you smart guy. You know, the moon's full. It takes less energy to pull the water up. a good collective logical concept. And I go over, I see him a couple of days down the road. I said, Antonio, I said, that's great. I said, I notice you're always pumping your water when the moon is full. He said, really? I mean, what the hell does the tribe care? I mean, he knows when to pump his water. It's not a concept. It's not built on some logical calendar. It's not it's not a matter of physics. It's just operating through him. I'd tell another story, but this is on tape, and I wouldn't tell that story about him on tape. Anyway. Yeah, right. We'll wait till the break. Okay, so we've got the Ajna binary. The first thing I want you to notice about this Ajna binary is that the third tone is related to the logical process, and the fourth tone is related to the abstract process. That's the first thing to recognize in terms of looking at streams and understanding the way the streams work relative to the sense. Here you can see that the sense is the eyes. That. Well, you can personalize that at the line level. Because at the line level, it's about whether you're going to be a failure or not, whether you can make it or not, because it becomes personalized at that level. But when you're looking at it from the perspective of the tone, failure is special. In other words, it is the failure to continue. We are so far away in our Maya that we forget that the deepest fear that lies within us is the fear that our species will disappear. There's no deeper fear. The fear of extinction. Everything on this planet gets wiped out. What do we lose? 40 species of something a day or a month or whatever it is now. They're flying out the door, and you've got all these softies who are so dumb, mourning them. They want to clone them and keep them in zoos. They're not supposed to be here. They didn't make it, folks. So one of the deepest fears inside of us as a species is we will not make it. We're at the top of the food chain. It gets real scary when you're at the top of the food chain because you relax. It's like the Roman Empire. You get to the top of the food chain, you relax, the whole thing falls apart. So there is an inner vigilance that is there in the genetic drive to maintain our security. As a matter of fact, as we have become more and more sophisticated in terms of our technology and education, one of the places where we invest the greatest amount of human capital is in keeping us alive and in keeping our immune systems healthy. I mean, we spend billions and billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars in order to improve on these mechanisms and keep them cooking. All this business about cloning, in vitro, any of these techniques, we're the first species ever that can go like this to the fates. And people think that's bad. I want to give Earth a Nobel Evolution Prize. Because that's what it's about. You see, our whole drive for security is not complete by getting to the top of the food chain. It isn't. It's only complete when we have the security that we are not going to perish. That we're not going to go down in smoke from some comet like the dinosaurs. That we're not going to be wiped out like some animal that we fed on. We want to make sure that we're going to be able to stay around forever. That's our job. Follow that stream. When you start at the 54, one of the most remarkable things about the 54 is the fourth line, as you know. That fourth line is all about the mystical potential to be recognized. Recognition is everything to the 54th gate. It calls for recognition. It's one of the mythologies of America. This is the whole thing about the way in which the right eye operates. And because it's always looking at the patterns, it's always preparing for action in that way. I can take action. I know the pattern. Here's the pattern. I'll follow the pattern. The pattern's secure. I know it's secure. Away you go. See, this is how the logical mind seduces somebody into taking action when in fact they may not have any right whatsoever to take that action. And the way in which it seduces us is it says to us, look, it's logical. Come on, dummy, it's logical. 1 and 1 equals 2. Go ahead, do it. Just do it. Yeah. I've always tried to find a way to properly insult the mind and put it in its right place, And the mind, I've always reminded you, is this little corporal in the research department that wants to be dictator. And it's amazing how many people allow, this uncontrollable, weird thing, to become the dictator and the controller of their lives. And human beings do it all the time. And of course, because the mind at the genetic level is only interested in what to do or not to do, in other words, the morality of being involved in life, that our minds naturally jump from that and take the assumption that because we dwell on it, it is what we're about. I think, therefore I am. And other stuff like that. We're also going to see that in looking at the Ajna binary, we're dealing with two very different aspects of the collective process. Now, one of the things that's interesting statistically in our research is that there's very little significance between the abstract and the logic. Very little. In other words, they are not simply mirrors of each other, but they are complementary mirrors of each other. Yet it is only the logic for us that can be reliable. Because the logic being rooted in its pattern will be reliable because it means that it can be authenticated in the same way by somebody else. That's why when you do research, anything that you research has to be duplicated by any other independent body. It's the way in which logic assures us that it's legitimate. But of course, you don't have that with the abstract. It's not possible with the abstract process. There is no pattern, and there is no logic. There is simply what appears to be the chaos and flow of things. Now, that's a very different kind of vision. And it says something interesting about the way in which mind works is that the inner vision is chaotic and the outer vision is seeking order. This is what we're doing all the time. We're moving from the chaos to the order. Tribe has its just principles. Each tribe has its way in which it enforces punishment. Steal a loaf of bread, lose your left hand. Thank you very much. And yet, we would never have gotten to where we are today without it. I wait because there's nothing else to do in this life. And I know that as long as I'm alive in the world, that this theme of violence will remain. But I also know that when the solar plex undergoes its transition, that one of the most important transitions will be the transition that takes place in the 49th gate, in which the whole idea and the whole concept of violence is going to be reprocessed. In America today, maybe you have 4% that are 3-generational families. It's basically gone. In other words, there has been a transition that's taken place, and that transition has been disturbing in terms of the continuity of the culture. And there's a lot of people who get very upset. They get very upset because they think that their culture is dying. And of course, out of that, you have the roots of fundamentalism. In other words, you have a fundamental reaction. You have all of these old faiths that are now going to the hardest line they can find because everything is dissolving around them. human to stay bonded, to stay in community, to help each other, to be good neighbors, blah, 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 blah. All of that coercion, that's going to change, because you won't need the same kind of threat in order to keep the desire field in line. You won't. But we're not there. Right? The 4037, what I call the bridge. The 4037 is the mystical bridge. It bridges the 1949 to the 51, 25, 10, 20. Yet it's not mystical at all. The 4037 is to the tribe what the 1156 is to the abstract collective. In other words, the 4037 is the channel of the ego emotional seeker. The 37th gate is the gate of the mouth. And it speaks reams about this gate that we call the family. Feed me. Feed me. Family is built on consistent, reliable feeding. That's family. You have your baby, they give you your feeding schedule. This is family. And the 37th gate as the mouth, it is also after all, we have certain parts of us that are always meant to attract the opposite sex. And of course, the mouth is one of them. It's very prominent. And of course, the whole thing about the 37 is that the 37 is always trying to attract the ego that's on the other side. Always. That's a funny combination, eh? The ego, no awareness. The solar plex, no awareness. And the two of them together, two motors. And you meet them everywhere in the world, eh? They're so common, these 4037s, just like the 4323 and the 2034. These oppositions, you see them everywhere. Think about the polarity in this channel. The 40th gate is the prime gate of aloneness, deliverance. And as a prime gate of aloneness, it always has its hand out and it always says no. It never says yes first. It always says no, in the sense that it's always denying. The only thing that you can do with an ego is massage it. Then you might get out of the denying. And that's what the 37 does. The 37 knows how to massage that ego. Oh, you're wonderful, dear. It knows exactly what's necessary. And of course, this is the tension between them. The moment that the 37 can impact on the 40 says, what do you want? What do you want from me? What am I supposed to do? They had a problem. If you punish the pure human and threaten them into being monogamous, and if they have the same mate in their bed every night, you may end up with 90 children. And that's expensive. 7 or 8 might be useful on the farm, the way we started, because 3 or 4 will probably die before they're 10. But the fact is that you can go on and on and on. If somebody was to go into each and every one of our houses today, and without our knowledge, remove one thing, we would notice. Sooner or later, you're going to notice. We need our patterns. And even while you're not noticing, you're uncomfortable. Reliability for us as human beings is very important for us. So we have our names and we have our numbers and we have our addresses and we have all these fixed patterns that assure us that we know where we live, what the day of the week is. all of those little answers, they're all necessary for us, and it means that at the genetic level, that's really obsessive. Not going to make it. We're not going to survive. We're not going to be able to sell the product. We're not going to have access to the willpower. And of course, the ego is not aware. And when you're looking at the 26th gate, you're looking at a gate of denial. In the biology, in the way in which human form evolves, one of the most important steps in the stages of conception is the stage in which the ego, after being connected to the G center through the channel of initiation, it then goes downwards to the 44 and hooks up the spleen. That's what they actually look like. Okay, these are birds, reptiles, fish. The reason I'm showing you this, every single form of life has a cross-special connection. Has a cross-special connection in this case that if you're looking at birds, reptile, and fish, their cross-special connection is only to humanity. And the way they cross over is that they go from the 44 to the 26. Now, one of the things about the relationship between the 44 and the 26 is something very important. It's the difference between warm-bloodedness and cold-bloodedness. So one of the major attributes or the major impact of the ego is that it is the ego that actually establishes the temperature of the tribe. Now, if the temperature stays cool, nothing starts to stink. You know, but when things heat up, you know, it can really begin to reek. Now, one of the things about this relationship, of course, is that the 44 is basically cold-blooded. It's cold-blooded, and its basic concern is not personal. Remember, I told you this is not a personal gate, and it's one of the most difficult things for somebody who lives the 44 as part of their design not to get caught up in that personally, because you're always looking at the ego that always identifies personally. And so it can be very difficult to avoid that, but basically it is cold-blooded. What it's there for is for the cold-blooded calculation of what it takes to survive. And what it takes to be able to deal with the hot or potentially hot ego at the other end. The 44 is always trying to cool the 26 down. Now, if you're somebody like me who happens to be an ego manifester and has a 26 gate, can I get hot? I mean, real hot. Her son said to Loki, he said, I'm not allowed to go to your house anymore. I thought, well, I mean, what to do? That's life, eh? And of course, in dealing with all of that, in looking at that, that's the 37 part of God. The 37 part of God is this overwhelming involvement in it in the hopes that it really is going to make a difference. I mean, in the hopes that it's going to make a difference. Yet underneath all of that is how easy it can turn to hate. I mean, it's one of the things to see about this line. I'm a 40, and I have the second line. And I've met many 37s in my life, and often I meet 37 5s. And to watch my relationship with the 37-5, don't you dare break this bulb. That was the advantages of high technology here. You're having a long day, are we? the resistant. I'm too much the individual and the existentialist. Let's just see what design is like today. Yet there is a part of me, because I carry the third tone, there's a part of me that can never escape that. There's a part of me that can always see, based on the pattern as I see it, where that pattern is going, what its pace is, all of those things, because it's part of the way in which outer vision operates. Now that says something very interesting about the importance of stimulation. You know my concern about children, my love of children. And one of the things so interesting is the studies that have been done on the developmental capacities of children that are highly stimulated in their early years, first 3 years of life, and those children that don't get a lot of stimulation. In other words, a lot of people talking to them, reading to them, showing them things, bright colors, all of these various things. They try to get us to go along with them. And one of the ways that they do that, of course, is by enslaving us into the modern bureaucracy and into the modern social systems. The moment that you have a social security number, they've got you at some level or another. So this outer vision has to be seen in two ways. That is, because it's moralistic, you've got two ways in which it works as a polarity. The first way is, let's call it the positive. Let's be nice. The positive way is that there are legitimate questions that can have valid answers, that can bring genuine improvement to society. And that the real task after that is to be able to be reasonable enough to get society to identify with it and go along with it. That's very positive. No question about that. However, the collective can also, and it always will, that the moment that you have somebody that can present that positive argument, you will see that instantaneously you have the devil's advocate who's going to be able to present exactly the opposite argument. Exactly opposite. It's like the story of Venus. Right? I mean, the scientists can't figure Venus out. It flips them out. For example, on Venus, there's a mountain range that's 25 miles high. And it's been 25 miles high for 600 million years. Now here, we cannot imagine that. How the hell is that possible? There's an atmosphere there. There's all those things there. Why is it that mountain range can stay the same height for 600 million years? I mean, no mountain range on Earth stays the same height. It's constantly either being pushed up or being eroded downward. So you have all these scientists on either side, and they all have these splendid computer animated, verified, blah, blah, blah theories of theirs that are exactly opposite each other. They found out something incredible. The planet's dead. And what happens to it is that 600,000 years ago, the whole surface of the planet collapses into its boiling hot center and then reforms and starts again. So right now, it's dead. At any given time, the whole planet, the whole surface of the planet collapses into itself. Everything is fresh and it starts all over again. When they finally figured that out, because they took meteor impact images of the planet and dated it. And what they discovered is they're all the same age. I mean, it happened at the same time and then everything died. Nothing changes. Nothing's different. 600 million years. Same movie on the surface. Collapse underneath. But my point is, the scientists, you're always going to have these two sides. So one of the things to recognize about the negative application of the collective is that it is a positive contribution. The whole thing about the collective is it's not tribal. It does not allow itself to be placed under the thumb of authority. And so there's always going to be a place in the collective for negative challenge. Now, of course, what infuriates us is when that negative challenge is applied to something that appears to be viable, useful. That's when we feel like that kind of challenge is an uncomfortable thing. But recognize genetically what that means for us. We're meant to be argumentative creatures. There's so many people in my life who don't like to argue. You know, they don't like to fight, what they call fighting or squabbling or, you know, this or that. As long as they can keep their jobs and the factory doesn't close down. I mean, after all, there's always a hierarchy. You know, but the moment that you've got an executive that's taking millions of dollars and you got a company that's going bankrupt, you're going to have a lot of people very upset. Because the more successful logic is in establishing the credentials of certain patterns, there's always more and more patterns that still haven't been resolved, concretized. And the tribe again says, yeah, but they don't really know. You know, every other day, the FDA releases a drug on the American market that's been researched on 12 people in a small room in a hospital somewhere. You know? Now, to the tribe, that's horrifying. You know, to the collective, well, you know, this is an experiment, after all. And we are the ones they're experimenting on. I mean, we get that all the time. You have that now in the American political season. You know, you have all these promises of formulas. This is what's going to be secure. Here's the pattern that's going to be secure. Vote for me. Identify with me and my propaganda and identify with my morality. And of course, you know, here in America, particularly with the two-party system, you basically have a moral collective system. You know, in which both sides see the other side as the demon, and in which the morality is always going back and forth. Right? I think it's kind of cute that the right that wants to save unborn babies doesn't want to put locks on guns. I mean, if that isn't mixed morality, you know? I mean, there's something really funny about all that. You know, and the left that says it's okay to kill these babies or unborn or whatever you want to call them, they want everybody not to have guns. You can go on and on in terms of how you look at it because, of course, the morality is always binary. It's always mixed. And in the collective, that's the whole thing about the collective. It's expected to be there. The tribe says, look, what is it? Is it this or is it that? And the collective says, well, most of us think it's this. So that's what we're going to do. And of course, the tribe says, no, this is crazy. When you go into a African village today in Uganda or in any of the Central African states that are being decimated by HIV, the fact that the collective is willing to do something about that opens the tribe up in a hurry. And it's one of the things to understand about the tribe is that the only time you change the tribe is when you save their children. If you save their children, you're already telling them that you want their genetic pool to remain. It's not like they take it in that way, but that's the message that they're getting. You're saving their children. And of course, if you succeed, I mean, remember, that's the other thing. The collective often tries to save children only to kill them. Okay. But the fact is that in the context that we have it today, the collective is doing a pretty good job at trying to save the children of the tribes that are in trouble. And this is where they have their most lasting impact. And it's the only way that the collective can truly touch the tribe. You see, the tribe will let the individual in to make love to its sons and daughters to get new genetic material. They already know that the individual is acceptable in the long-term movement of their genetic pool, but the collective is always on the outside. Only when the collective comes to their rescue are they going to pay any attention. Gates of denial are always open to being called, whereas at the other end, if you look at the 37, the only thing they can be called to is disappointment. Because all they have is longing. They just have a longing. I mean, they may be the mouth, but the 40 is the stomach. It's where it really gets processed. It's where things can really take place. And of course, out of that, we have the stomach to do the tribe's work. And this is what the sixth tone brings to us, is that it brings cooperative effort in terms of establishing our communities. Remember that it's the ego that builds the cities, that builds the churches, that puts its willpower to work for the benefit of the community. And the way it does that is it enslaves a lot of sacrals to go along with it. The ego promises, the sacral delivers under the whip. Not anymore, let's hope. I mean, the awake sacral can always overwhelm any ego. And for years and years and years, millennium and millennium and millennium, it's been working the other way around. It could be, might be, using their language, dealt with and be productive as such. That leads to the 17th gate, and it leads to the symbol of the right eye. The 17th gate is the gate of opinion. Now, the 17th gate, like the 11th gate, these are gates of teaching. But they are gates of teaching, which means that they are first gates of being students. And it's very important for them both, in that sense, to understand that process. In other words, that first they have to learn and then they can teach. They're not going to get it the other way around, which means that it takes time in their process. That 17th gate of opinion, genetically, there is something unusual in this gate because this gate has problems with time. It's one of the most consistent things you'll find with the 17th gate is that it doesn't really know how long things take or how quick they take. And it is not going to have a successful judgment when it comes to the timing of things. Now think about that. That's where the opinion is being established as to how the pattern can be seen in the future. If that doesn't make you nervous, we all know that, eh? If you grew up in the post-war era, in the 60s, it was very common to have magazine articles and a whole set of science fiction genre that was going to tell you what 2000 was going to look like. Now, those were all 17s. I mean, you just know that. We don't have all the things that they assumed that we were going to get. And it's not that we may not get them. Beam me aboard, Scotty, and all that nonsense. It doesn't mean we may not get them, but the timing is really off. It's really off. 2000 really doesn't look all that different from 1960. We don't have all these flying things and blah, blah, blah. We don't have the, cities on the moon and, all of these things that were predicted, and the household gadgets. There's a case I'm going to miss. The only thing I'm going to miss in America, I'm truly going to miss in America, aside from you, of course. I don't want to upset you. The only thing I'm going to miss in America is my electric garage and the weird cable stations. That's America. It really is, And the cable stations, you get to see the bizarrest stuff on these cable stations. The things they sell and the way they try to sell them, all of this stuff. Anyway, I don't want to get into it. It's too much. Outer vision. 17th gate, when you're dealing with the 17th gate, you got to see that, look, if their timing is off, how many presidential candidates say, not in my term will I increase taxes? Now, they don't want to. It's bad politics. But they got the timing off. Or you can call them a liar, whichever you prefer. there's always going to be difficulty with the timing, which is why you have to be very, very careful about somebody who says, as people do to me all the time, well, the pattern's great. I mean, within moments, everybody's going to know. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much. But your timing, your timing's off. Be wary of logical people making time promises. Now, one of the things about that is that if it wasn't for the distortion in the time in the 17, we really wouldn't be racing along as fast as we're doing. I mean, not being able to grasp the time properly always makes us feel even more inadequate and pushes us even faster to try to make up for the lost time. Well, I'm going to stay with it. I thought I'd have it done in 2 years, but I'm going to stay with it. Fortunate in Canada, and that Canada has a different relationship to the multicultural, and everybody is sort of hyphenated. You're an Italian Canadian or you're a German Canadian. But it's something important to recognize that the holding on of the root isn't a philosophy question. It's a genetic question. It's actually going to keep you cooler. Since I moved away from Europe, my son has stopped speaking his second language and only understands it and hears it. And I know that's unhealthy for him. I know that the moment he goes back and he starts using another language again, part of his root, then he's going to be much more at peace within himself, even though it's operating a level he doesn't have touch with. Remember, tone level, you don't have any, you can't get to it. So again, the moment to see is that, there are certain things at the surface level, if you let go of, that makes everything quieter down below, because this is all about basic security, and particularly if you're somebody who carries a first tone in your design, in your profile. Remember now, you're going to have many tones in your design, obviously, for all your lines. So that means that you're going to be able to look at that tonal level down to the line level. And where you see those first tones, you're going to have to see that deep underneath that is a real need for security. And that all the fears that can come out of that. It's about you recognizing that that's the way in which you have completed your wholeness. You take all those tones that are within you, that are within all of us, and you represent all of that through the language that you speak and the clarity that you bring through your language. It's essential for us to be able to communicate honestly and clearly with each other. Only then are we really making a contribution far beyond what is expected of us from the whole. The whole doesn't expect us to get to that point. It's nice if we can. It doesn't need us to be there. But it's really important for us to see that this is not black magic. This is science. It has to be shared. It has to be brought to others, and it has to be brought to them in a language that belongs to each and every one of you. Your language, out of your experience, out of your truth. That's how things actually move in the world. That's how you take all of this and you put it together into one. Right?